time for us to turn back to the jamboree that is the Premier League. I'm delighted to say Daniel Harris is with us. Daniel, good morning to you. How are you?
I'm good, thanks. Hi, everyone.
I see some people are coming around to the notion that Jamie Carragher today was saying that ordinarily he views international football as a bit of a distraction from the Premier League, but this time, because of what's going on with international football, and particularly the fact that Alisson won't be able to play, he's mightily offended by international football. I quite enjoyed the break away from the Premier League. We certainly had a reasonable international window and have been slow enough to get back into the thinking, but here we are this morning having to think about Newcastle and their transfer policy.
Yeah, I mean, well, the whole Newcastle thing is just something that is not going to go away, is it? Because every time you think about Newcastle, you're going to think about what Newcastle now are, which is just another arm of a despotic regime. And the way that people have assimilated this so easily into their view of football, like you see people talking about how what they're going to do. I read a journalist yesterday saying they're trying to do things the right way. And the thing is when you're torturing and beheading and persecuting, there is no right way. Like finding, organically growing a football club, it just doesn't matter. It doesn't mean anything, and it doesn't matter, and no one cares about it. No one should care about it.
Here's the thing, right? Because obviously we completely agree on the Saudi Arabian regime, and I kind of feel like we should call Newcastle Saudi Arabia from now on. But this, like everything in sport, the reason sportswashing works is that we end up talking about the 150 million quid that they're going to spend on 5 players in the next, and sportswashing works, unfortunately.
Yeah, it does, because what you end up with is you weaponise a large group of people, because the reason why sports washing works, and why in particular football washing works, is because there's nothing in the world like football. There's no other way of making so many different kinds of people feel so much emotion, so much joy, so much love, all the good stuff, basically. And it's been eventually, like, the bad folk realised that this was the case, and they started packaging it for their own ends. And it's not so much, I don't think, about we're all talking about who Newcastle are going to spend their money on, although there is something extremely revolting about that. It's that they've weaponised tens of thousands of Newcastle fans to make their case, to misdirect. Well, look, no one stopped watching Disney films, and look, Saudi Arabia invested in Disney. That kind of thing, making those kind of arguments and obfuscating in that kind of way. And that's why sports washing works. But the main reason why sports washing works is because football's amazing. There's nothing like it.
Yeah, and it's obviously quite complicated because everybody in all of the major global imperial powers have at one point or another used sport for their own ends and realise that it's actually a really easy way to get your messaging across. We see the NFL taking the money from the various branches of the US military post 9/11. All that kind of stuff happens.
Yeah, and not just the NFL. You see it, like I was at a cup final, I guess it was probably 2007, where the FA Cup was flown in by army people, and just like, what on earth is this? It's a football match. But yeah, it's a way of expressing power and inspiring what began as a kind of benign nationalism. So everything changed, I think, probably in England with the 1953 FA Cup final, which came just before the coronation and just when people were starting to get back on their feet mentally, but also financially after the war. So there was a massive influx of televisions into the UK where people were going to buy televisions for the coronation that was in June. But what they did was they bought them a few weeks earlier because Stanley Matthews, this kind of national hero who in theory was meant to represent all the things that Britain thought about itself, kind of this kind of demure, quiet, unassuming, but extremely heroic hero. And they're all going to watch him win the FA Cup. And what they used to do, at least to have in the cup final, was they used to have a lot of community singing. And that's when I talk about benign nationalism. That's what I mean, because you've got like people singing Knees Up Mother Brown, and I've got a lovely bunch of coconuts together. And there was an extensive song list at this 1953 FA Cup final. But you also have the national anthem and the Queen there. And then this game ensues, which was one of the greatest games of football that anyone had seen till that point, with this ludicrous fairy tale ending. And suddenly football replaces cricket, particularly as the national sport. But not just that, it sort of grows, it burgeons and it grows into this national religion, essentially. and then it becomes used, this tool of soft power. And actually in the UK, they're probably behind the curve, because as you say, what's been going on in America for a lot longer, where in particular you've got NFL films, you've got this film body who realised that you could make amazingly cinematic stuff by using sport. And then you could also control what people are allowed to see because you own all the rights to it. And you then have, it then becomes this soft power, a way of inspiring this national culture that tends to be quite homogenous and quite exclusive. And what you see now is really the extension of that, like bread and circuses, ultimately.
Yeah, now in fairness, it's not just states who have seen this. Religion has obviously seen the power of this too, with prayers in dressing rooms, and we have it in the GA. It's in America. It's in every high school in America. They all take a knee and say, "Is it Our Father?" They say, "Is it what? It's not Hail Mary."
One of the hits.
Yeah. I never understood why this isn't match fixing. Like, if it's actually on, if that's what's going on, then why is it not match fixing?
I mean, obviously, it's at some cosmic level. They think it is. That's the whole point. Right. Look, let's talk about the disgusting spending of money. Then, I mean, if you're sitting in Manchester United's boardroom, you know, it's that old adage: if you can't see the sucker at the poker table, it's you. For the longest time, recently, anybody who's been sitting down with the Manchester United brains trust when it comes to transfers has been like an extra 10 million, an extra 15 million, an extra 20 million. Finally, there's another sucker at the table. Is this the bit where they push their chips in and go, you can have Lingard and Martial, and you can have anybody else you want there, maybe Donny van de Beek, and we'll give it to you for 250 million?
I mean, there is a possibility, I guess. I mean, it's kind of strange because what United's transfer behaviour this summer in some ways, like the thing that I don't really understand is I can't believe we're back talking about this midfield player that United need. I mean, but why they wouldn't have traded in Lingard and Martial and Van de Beek, whatever was necessary to get the player that they really need. So we could sit here and say, well, let's assume for a second that those guys would go to Newcastle. We could think, well, obviously United would sell them because it makes no sense for United not to sell these fringe players to a team like Newcastle, except they didn't sell them in the summer for reasons that are not that difficult to understand. So yeah, I mean, I think in the first instance, Newcastle are going to have the problem that a lot of clubs that suddenly happen upon money have, is persuading players to join them. So when City got money, they're in a slightly different situation because it just happened to be, it was just after the credit crunch, and it was at a time when United were really getting and taken to the cleaners by the Glazers, which meant that City had free run at quite a lot of players. I mean, they had to pay an obscene amount of money to Yaya Toure, but then Yaya Toure is an obscenely good player. So I always say that any transfer that succeeds is worth however much money you're lucky enough to pay for it, because you're only probably 50-50 on transfers, roughly, of transfers that work and transfers that don't. So the fact that Man City paid an obscene amount of money for Yaya Toure makes absolutely no difference because he was amazing. So what? Even if you forget, even before you factor in the fact that the owners have so much money, it doesn't matter. But they also got a free run at Sergio Aguero, a free run at Vincent Kompany, and a free run at David Silva. Now, the only players at whom Newcastle are getting free runs are players that no one else really wants. Like, they might get a free run at Philippe Coutinho, who's a better player than the one that they've got, but he's not a player who's going to take them to where Saudi Arabia want to be. So they will have that period where they're trying to get better players and they're spending probably a lot of money on better players. But at the same time, I don't know. I mean, I feel like an absolute moron saying this, but it would be interesting to see on how financial fair play works for them, because with City, it just didn't exist. So they just went and bought everyone, as did Chelsea. Whereas with City, because that was the Chelsea one, was the real, like, the halcyon days of 408 of Sky Sports News, where literally every time you turned it on, there was a yellow ticker and Chelsea assigned someone else. I don't know if that's going to be something that Newcastle can achieve, but I guess on the other hand, they've got 55,000 capacity stadium to begin with and all the TV money, so they are in a position where they're making money, but they're not going to be able to go and do what City and Chelsea did because the rules are there to stop at least some level of manipulation.
It would be interesting to see this in action, the financial fair play work against Newcastle United, because if there is a world in which Manchester City and Paris Saint-Germain are genuinely self-sufficient at this point and can spend lavishly with the money that they're earning themselves, then I wonder, could the ECA, headed up by Nasser Al-Khelaifi, just say, screw you, Saudi Arabia, FFP is coming down hard on you?
It's possible. I mean, there's always this situation where you see, like, that statement said that they're committed to. They've assured the Premier League that the owners are separate from Saudi Arabia, and it's just like, well, it seems unlikely, or at least people who routinely break human rights laws, who torture and murder, are probably not that perturbed by rules set and enforced by football administrators. And they will find a way. I mean, we saw it with City that they got away with the FFP situation, but it was on a technicality rather than you guys definitely didn't do this. It was statute of limitation stuff. And on the one hand, you think, as you say, like, well, Qatar are now quite effective and quite powerful in the running and the administration of the game. So maybe they'll say, well, actually, bad luck, lads. Or there might just be a situation where legally a route can be found to allow them to get away with it. But what I would say is, FFP will probably hinder things to a certain degree, but not to the degree that it was meant to. But I mean, when we're talking about FFP, we do have to be real about FFP. The FFP is not this panacea for all footballing ills, because what FFP really does is, what the point of FFP should be, to stop state power, or any kind of power, in fact, turning up and just turning football upside down, just with an enormous injection of cash, which is not really competitive and not really fair. But football wasn't competitive and wasn't fair before FFP, because with FFP, what you sort of get is, you also get protecting the existing cartel. Yeah. The clubs that got in before it, or the clubs that make their own money.
Yeah.
Right. So the only real way of sorting this out is salary caps, wage caps, caps on squad sizes, combinations of those things that would make it better. And I want to be clear, I'm totally behind that. I don't want to be able to look at balance sheets or whatever and say, well, or wage bills and say, well, these are the clubs that are going to fill in the top four. And the fact that last year's top four already sitting in the top four places this year, we don't particularly want to see that. But what you've got now in English football that you didn't have before is, you've got more clubs that are quite good. There are 4 clubs that there's obviously a bit between them, but there are 4 clubs that you could legitimately say could challenge for the title, and that's not often the case.
Well, even within FFP, they could still spend about 180, 200 million, whatever it is this year. So in this window alone, so it's as you say, it has actually codified their ability to spend to a certain amount, and part of that is because Ashley never spent very much anyway. So it will be interesting to see what happens. On the basis that there will be no incomings, Manchester United should keep everybody until the end of the season and ride it out with the squad they have, or should they try and offload somebody in the winter transfer window to try and free up space, at least on the potential that you might be able to tempt a midfielder mid-season?
I'm not sure. I mean, I think the fact that Ole kept players in the summer suggests that he wouldn't bin them at Christmas unless he was able to spend the money and get something in. And that might depend a little bit on where United are, what those players have done in that time. Jesse Lingard's already been extremely useful, and he's free in the summer. So I would imagine Lingard will stay for the season. Van der Beek, on the other hand, is different because he's miserable, he's not playing, and you probably don't want that energy around the squad. So he'll either get to play or he won't. And if he doesn't get to play much between now and January, I think there's a fair chance he would go, whether or not United are able to spend the money. But I think that if Ole wasn't able to replace him, he'd be circumspect, because he's naturally quite conservative in that regard. Yeah,
that seems to be the conservatism seems to be unusual, because certainly if you come up at the elbow sleeve of Ferguson, then there was no real conservative. Or maybe I'm misremembering the Ferguson era. It felt like when he needed stuff, he went out and got it, and he was quite brave in his transfers at the time, and they did spend plenty of money. So it seems that there's a part of Solskjaer which I don't quite understand when it comes to that, and maybe that somebody else is making those decisions. But not letting Van der Beek go and then not using him feels a little bit like it hasn't been thought through.
I'm sure it's been thought through. I definitely wouldn't say that. I'm absolutely certain it's been thought through. The question is whether it's been thought through well or not. And I don't know. I mean, we'll see if he actually gets to do anything. I mean, I would have sold Anthony Martial this summer as well, because I think that given the options United have, I wouldn't have wanted as a manager to be in a position of feeling that I had to play him. Because if you've got a player of that calibre and that level of experience now around, you can't just never play him. And I think what you'll see Ole struggling to pick the right games for the right players, because he's just got so many of them, and he's trying to give everyone a chance and trying to give everyone a game. And it's a different kind of conservatism. I mean, I think Fergie's conservatism tended to come in more as he got a bit older, which you often see. You saw it with Arsene Wenger as well, that when people start to get towards the end, they're thinking about legacy and they're thinking about protecting legacy and establishing legacy. And I felt like with Fergie, that turned him slightly more defensive than the gambler that had kind of existed for the first half of his career at United. And I mean, there are other things that happened as well. Like they got hit on the break by Real Madrid in 2000, and that also made him slightly more conservative. But he began to think about that one more Champions League that he wanted to win. And you start to protect what you've got rather than really going after what you haven't got. Ole's slightly different in that he was ruthless when he turned up. He's moved Marcus Rashford to centre forward. He basically binned Romelu Lukaku. Well, I know Lukaku wanted to leave as well, but I think probably before that was known. He lost his place in the team to Marcus Rashford, and he was quite ruthless. It got rid of Fellaini as basically the earliest available opportunity. But he's become a little bit more conservative since then. I think he was quite conservative bringing Mason Greenwood through, which maybe was the right decision. I don't know, because Mason Greenwood then came through and was great. But it felt like he could have come through a little bit earlier and also been great. He's been quite conservative in his team selections. He's been quite conservative with his youth young players as well. And it's a difficult thing to balance because he does have this team that's full of attacking talent and it is slightly weaker defending transitions. So he's trying to work out what the best way is, and we still haven't found it. But my suspicion is that this team would be better going for it than not, because I don't think the defence is sufficiently settled and sufficiently confident to be able to invite pressure. So what they really need to do is they obviously need to protect against getting caught in transition, because obviously that keeps happening. They keep getting countered on. But that feels like something that's a very specific fix rather than something that requires a change of approach.
Taking that into account, then, how excited are you to see a Manchester United defence without both Harry Maguire and Raphael Varane this weekend?
Well, obviously Varane's not playing. I'd wait and see on Maguire.
Okay.
I wouldn't be surprised if Maguire turned up. He's been out quite a while. It's not a match fitness issue. I mean, particularly given he's a centre back, like he doesn't have to do that much running. So I'd wait and see on Maguire. But yeah, I mean, Lindelof and Bailly is not what anyone would want to see particularly. But Lindelof is a good player. He's a steady player. We know what his limitations are. He's not quick enough. He's not strong enough. Occasionally hesitates, but lots of defenders do that. Lindelof is a really good third centre back. And Bailly's top level is all right. He's just like the brainlessness that you see a lot of the rest of the time is problematic, and you just never know what you're going to get with him. But I don't know. Maybe I'm going to look like a moron saying this, but if United don't beat Leicester, my guess is it won't particularly be because of the centre-backs. It will be because the rest of the team isn't functioning in the way that they'd like it to, because Leicester are missing players as well. I'm not sure who's going to be back for them, but indeed he's not playing. I think Evans might be back, but Wesley Fofana certainly isn't playing. So Leicester have got their own problems. They're playing even worse than United are. They've got fewer points than United and they're missing players. So I wouldn't take the centre-backs as an excuse for not winning. I wouldn't really take injury ever as an excuse for not winning, particularly when you have a lavishly appointed squad. If United don't beat Leicester, it'll be because United don't play well enough to beat Leicester, and that would be the fault of the players and the managers, not the fault of the players that aren't there who got injured. Speaking
of Leicester, Brendan Rodgers, obviously one of the most prominent managers linked with Newcastle. The Telegraph today reporting, though, that he's actually more interested in the City job eventually. That's where he has his eyes set, and that might make a fair bit of sense as well.
Has he? That's good of him.
Is he good enough to do the City job, and actually is he perfect for the Newcastle job?
I mean, what I would really like is for a manager to say, of course I'm not working for you scumbags. Say so publicly. That would be nice. But I don't know if he's gunning for the City job. I mean, I'm sure he fancies himself for everything, really. I'm sure he fancies himself for a better job than the Leicester job, and that's not to denigrate the Leicester job, which is a great job. And I mean, we know it's a great job because he left another great job at Celtic in the middle of the season when they're about to win the treble to take it. And we know that's a great job. So I think that he said, we have been told, I think John Percy wrote it, and John Percy's usually bang on with everything to do with Leicester, that he won't take the job. Getting the City job would be a harder thing to do, but I mean, we don't know when Guardiola's going to leave. But the reality is that the top three managers in the world probably at the moment are Guardiola, Klopp and Tuchel, and they've all got jobs. And after that, who do you go for? I mean, because there's no way City would go for someone like Antonio Conte, who is a good manager, but obviously a mess. leaves a mess at the end, and doesn't play the kind of football that City have decided befits them. And after that, I mean, who is there? You've got other managers who are punts. You've got Marco Rosa, he'd be a punt, and anyway, he has a nice job. Where are you really going? And I mean, we've talked about this in connection with what happens if United fire Ole Gunnar Solskjaer. Then what? Who are you going for? Because that obvious manager who you would want to come in and build something, Graham Potter, another name. I mean, no one who controls that size of club is going for Graham Potter, but he might be someone Newcastle would look at, although they're also meant to be looking at Ralph Rangnick, which also would make a lot of sense. Someone who could come in and not just be a good manager, but build you something. But yeah, I mean, I don't think it will be Brendan Rodgers. Whether he's good enough to go to a bigger club, I mean, I presume he'd go somewhere with better players and do well. But would he be able to compete at Man City with Jurgen Klopp if Jurgen Klopp's still at Liverpool? I mean, it doesn't look like he's got the genius that Jurgen Klopp does.
What about Frank Lampard in all this?
That would be, I mean, I guess he'd be the Mark Hughes appointment, where you get someone with a name who will help you attract a certain tier of player because they're famous and they obviously understand a lot about the game because they've played for high-level managers at a high level for a long time. So they definitely have stuff to impart. They should have some level of eye for a player as well. But if Frank Lampard goes to Newcastle, he's not someone you'd expect to be there in, say, 3 years' time. He's someone you'd expect to come and fill a slot to get them to establish them as a kind of top four competitor. That then means that you're settled enough to be able to go and get someone better.